Welcome to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast, where power, politics, and the world's most coveted materials collide. Rare earth elements power the backbone of tomorrow's most critical technologies. With China dominating global production, the U.S. and its allies must align strategically to ensure a stable future. This urgency prompted tech entrepreneurs Daniel O'Connor and Dustin Olesen to launch Rare Earth Exchanges, a news and insight platform built to equip stakeholders and decision makers with the tools and intelligence needed to reduce dependency and build prosperous resilience. Let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast. You're joined by me, Dustin, my co-host Daniel, and a special guest, Alex, who is the CEO of Buckstop. Alex, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Very excited to be here as well.
Perfect. Alex, your company has a novel approach to recycling using AI-driven methodology. So to kind of unpack all of that, we'd love to understand your background, how you got into working in this business and things like that.
A lot to unpack there. So just to introduce what we do, Buckstop is a data-driven urban mining company, and our goal is to enable a sustainable end of life for every electronic device on Earth eventually. And we've launched an appraisal engine in the renewable energy space. So our core value to the industry is helping folks understand what deployed assets are out there, when they're going to come offline, and what circularity strategies they could implement to recover value from resale or recycling. So we're a data business. We help folks measure deployed feedstock, and hopefully that'll help drive recovery rates up and ensure that there's a lot of stuff being channeled to the right kind of processes downstream. So that's kind of the high level on what we do. As far as how I got here, I actually spent the last 10 years prior to this building an OEM in the vertical farming space, and we manufactured automated greenhouses, which is very different from urban mining. But we were an OEM building electronic assets. We were shipping them all around the world. And so I had a front row seat to kind of the journey of developing kind of technology products and manufacturing them. And more importantly, I was watching all of them eventually go obsolete. And even before they go obsolete, stuff breaks, stuff happens. And when it happened, our operations teams didn't want to deal with it. It was a real value destruction event. Unfortunately, a lot of assets ended up in landfill because we didn't know what they were worth. The customers who bought them didn't know what they were worth. And it was just not something that our teams had the bandwidth to deal with. So I've been wondering, what would it take to create a better system for managing end of life for technology assets? And fortunate to know several other kind of companies in renewables, robotics, other distributed hardware systems. They all have the same thing. All of their assets eventually go obsolete. And so that was kind of the segue to what if we did create an end-of-life valuation platform that could really help these guys understand when stuff's going to come offline and what to do with it. And that is essentially the problem we're trying to solve today at Buckstop.
That's fantastic. And I can see how that would be a really big problem. You have this investment into an infrastructure, and when it becomes obsolete or it breaks, you're just like, wow, what is this worth? Do I just throw it away? That's really frustrating. So with that in mind, great introduction, by the way. Can you walk us through Buckstop's business model? How do you source the e-waste? How do you process it? What's your raw materials? Which raw materials do you recover? And things like that.
So I think maybe helpful to say what we don't do as well as what we do. So we're not a processor. We're not actually in the business of kind of recycling or reselling assets at this time. And really all we do is valuations. So we've launched an appraisal engine that is kind of the user interface for a technology we've developed called, we're calling it an algorithmic assay. So for those that don't know, an assay is the process of kind of breaking stuff down into its elemental form. Super important for recyclers to understand their feedstock and what are they processing. So we've developed a method of essentially deconstructing finished goods into their raw materials and rare earth elements. And we think that's a really important measurement layer for understanding the residual value in deployed technology. So we're working primarily in the renewable energy space, but our goal is to move across all electronic assets and provide accurate data about the residual value containing these assets. And so the underlying raw material and rare earth elements is kind of the baseline, but we also look at all of the resale channels and the regulations that apply to a given asset. So that process alone, I think is going to save folks a lot of time and provide kind of a higher fidelity tool for them to value these assets, because today one of the big problems is folks just don't know what they have and they don't know what it's worth. And so that sits, we're designing these tools primarily for people who've got deployed assets, so energy companies, things like that. But there's also a lot of applications for the downstream processors who are trying to figure out where is the feedstock, and when someone calls them with a load full of assets, what's it made of, what's it worth, how should they be thinking about reselling or recycling it. So we're in the valuation business, and we've just launched this appraisal tool in beta for the energy companies, and we think it's a really nice user experience for folks looking to value technology assets and figure out what to do with them.
I'll jump in, Dustin. First of all, Alex, super important. I think it's a brilliant idea, and it's critically needed, because if we think about the situation right now, there's the energy space, but then there's let's look at the rare earth element supply chain. Okay. Right now, about the output of that supply chain most frequently are magnets, right? Rare earth magnets. There's other components and elements that are produced, but let's just say magnets are the number one product. They're all different. There's bespoke, and they're different attributes depending upon the end customer. Well, only about 1% today, I think, worldwide are these magnets derived from recycled materials. What does that mean? That means that we're all highly dependent right now on where those rare earth mines are and where the processes are. Well, if it comes to heavy rare earths, about 99.9% of that is China. So right now, the Department of War, Defense Department, and other agencies we hear through the grapevine are very interested in recycling. So clearly that's going to become more important. So let's think about, a scenario where you have today very little recycling. If someone does have the output that can help with this process, walk us through how that would work. Like, how would you all engage with them, and how would the software or the system work, and what benefit would that bring to them as compared to if they didn't work with your system?
Yeah, so just putting, our primary kind of users are asset owners with deployed kind of hardware technology assets. So in that context, for energy specifically, they have asset retirement obligations, which is kind of an umbrella term that could be permitting through to decommissioning bonds, and even project-based financing, lending. They all require some kind of plan for what are you going to do with this thing once it's reaches the end of its life. And so that is an area which is dependent on third-party appraisals, independent engineering studies, that these can be very costly, time-consuming projects that are done. They're repeated for every project, and it's a lot of kind of a lot of assumptions in there. So it's not a standardized process. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of this stuff, when it does come to end of life, they're wildly off their estimates. And that's a huge cost center for a lot of the folks who are having to deal with end of life. And so that's kind of part of what we're doing here, is providing a tool that can be used by independent engineering companies, appraisal firms, but also these asset managers themselves, to look at, what do I have in terms of deployed metal, minerals? What are the resale opportunities? What are the regulations? And just trying to provide a standard user, flow for that. And we can basically take in their asset lists and kind of run our analysis to understand what the best pathways are to recover those assets.
So walk me through this. So basically, either an engineering group that is contracted to assess some recycled assets, or a company directly, your system can assay or assess the recycled material, and how much of terbium or whatever metal is in this recycled asset, correct?
Yeah, so we do go down to kind of the material level, and that's kind of the true baseline. And then we also look at resale, right? So it's a range, and if you can resell something that's more sustainable, it's also a higher part of value. So we try and optimize for that, but of course a lot of the stuff can't be. And I think that's useful for the asset owners. It does also have a lot of implications for companies that are doing decommissioning or recycling to use the tool. And I think it's important to frame this in the context of, there are assets and industries where, they're very circular. A lot of this stuff is figured out. But what we're concerned with is that in the US, your electronic waste recycling rate currently sits at between 15 and 22%, which is very low by international standards. You've got the EU kind of 40 45%, Taiwan north of 80%. So this can be done. And for us, it's like, well, if you can measure it, you can improve it. So how do we help these asset owners figure out the best pathways to manage their assets? For, a lot of these folks, they're not really optimizing for end of life. They're actually more often than not, they're hoarding it or they're putting it in a landfill. And that's really an information gap that we're trying to fill to be like, hey, this stuff has value. And we can make it easy for you to figure out what that value is.
No, I mean, it's very important. So Alex, physically walk us through, like, and obviously we don't want you to give away any secrets here, but is it a software? Is it like, how do you, let's say it's a data center and they're decommissioning, and let's say there's hardware, okay? And, they've got a whole bunch of it. Like, how physically, how does it work? How do you do the assay and run your AI to generate the report so that the buyer knows what they have here?
Yeah. So, without giving away exactly what we do,
of course, yeah, please don't.
So, no, I think at the high level, it's just a very, it's a lot of data engineering. Fortunately, our co-founding team has a pretty broad background from recovery of these assets through to data engineering. And it's basically how do you design, really train LLMs to work off very specific data around the residual values in raw material terms. And how do you consolidate and organize all that information to provide useful results for the asset owners, right? Because again, this stuff can be done through independent engineering studies, but it's a highly specialized workflow, and there's really kind of not a central point of truth for these inputs. So like that's part of what we do, is just organizing a lot of information from about devices, about the regulations, about shipping costs, really all of the variables that go into it, to create much higher fidelity answers that are backed by a lot more data points than these kind of standalone engineering studies.
I get it. It's fascinating. It's actually really fascinating. Now, I had another question before Dustin chimes back in. Why do you think it's the case that so low a number in the United States, let's say 15 to 20% thereabouts, why is our number so low compared to, let's say, Europe or Japan? Why is that?
I think there are so many factors that contribute to it, right? You've got regulations. I think the US actually, regardless of the current administration, is really changing its attitude. Certainly at the state level, there are landfill bans for a lot of electronics now, and that's moving quickly. We do a lot of work in solar, and just 2 more states have added landfill bans for solar assets this year alone. So I think that's moving quickly. The US has other challenges, just the sort of make waste economy, which is the linear economy, is very prevalent, and you've got a lot of logistical hurdles in the US that you don't have in more densely populated areas. But things are changing, and I think it's also important to look at history where, for example, cars were left on the side of the road to rot when they broke, and then in the midst of the Cold War, they started looking for more domestically sourced metals, and recycling was one of the key kind of options there. So companies like the Kelley Blue Book emerged to help formalize the aftermarket for these assets. And now cars, people don't talk about it, but it's the most circular industry on the planet. 97% of vehicles are recycled. Almost all of them have multiple owners and usage cycles. And actually, in many ways, that's a role model for a lot of the technology assets that are out there today. And where we come in is trying to kind of build that data layer and the ability to value the stuff, so that if you have one of these assets, you can figure out what to do with it. Which is, both more sustainable, but it's also an economic case for someone who has this asset. It's like, oh, if I could sell it or recycle it and get some money back, that's a great outcome for them. Whereas today, I think it's, while people putting stuff in landfill is a huge issue, and we'd love to solve that, I think the bigger issue is people do nothing. I'm sure you have a drawer full of electronics at home. Companies have that too. They have warehouses and storage yards in massive scale, in some cases, of stuff there because they kind of know it has value, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's where I think we really are trying to come in with a really streamlined and accurate tool to help them value their assets and provide the foundation for them to make better decisions about what to do with it.
Makes total sense. Dustin.
Yeah. So just a point of clarification is to use the tool that you've created. Is it like an app on my phone? I take a picture of my asset, or is it something where your team has to come out, they leverage your own tool to do the evaluation? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so we're still iterating on the right user experience, but for now it is very much like an enterprise software platform. So we can onboard clients. We work with their kind of operations teams, finance teams to run their appraisal to run their assets and things through our appraisal engine. But yeah,
Got it.
we see
Okay.
we see a future, within the next couple of years where it's opened up, not dissimilar to a Kelly Blue Book, where you can kind of just throw in a couple of assets, a big asset list, and run your appraisals from there.
That'd be probably honestly revolutionizing to follow that role model you said of like buying and reselling vehicles. So, what are some logistical or technology challenges you've encountered in just trying to build and scale Buckstop?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've all been taking a deep dive into the nuances of training LLMs. Obviously, we have people say, "Well, I could just ask ChatGPT," and it's like, "Well, good luck." I think you're seeing that a lot of these specialized use cases of AI actually take a lot of, there's a wide range of training and specialization that has to go on behind the scenes to produce consistent, accurate results. So, certainly working through a lot of those challenges. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main one. And then, of course, just trying to get out there and figure out what's the right kind of company and the right kind of assets that need this now. Because it's easy to say, every electronic device on Earth, but if you think about just the sheer scale of that endeavor, it's not attainable for in the near term. So we have to start somewhere. And so there's a lot of just figuring out what's needed. And, also in the context of the current geopolitical climate, what are the asset types and the underlying raw materials and elements that need to be recovered most. So you mentioned magnets, things like that. Those are areas that we're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah. Dustin, I was going to say the magnets are really, really key. On that note, so the company is founded early 2025. I'm assuming you just probably have a handful of employees at this stage, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're kind of slowly ramping up, but yeah, it's a small dedicated team of co-founders at this point. Yeah, we just launched the beta of this platform recently, and yeah, we're onboarding folks behind the scenes and really trying to think about what's the best way to scale up the appraisal engine, as I mentioned, kind of which segments and what kind of materials are we going to be focused on.
And I was going to ask you, Alex, in terms of investment, do you all have what you need now? I mean, you've obviously developed the 1.0 version, or maybe it's a little bit more advanced. In terms of, go to market, do you have the investment you need? Are you raising funding? Like, where are you with that process, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, we're pretty covered for now. We're fortunate to kind of gone into this endeavor with some really key supporters, and I think as we've talked about both, it's actually we knew that this was a needed thing, but if you look at what's been happening in the geopolitics, also the domestic kind of incentives, we're pretty well timed with that. Obviously, couldn't have seen that coming, but we were lucky to be well on our way to launching this platform when all of that stuff really started kicking off. So. Yeah, and we've got an investor group who kind of supports that. And I think we will look for additional funding next year, but we're all set for the time being.
So, we've been interviewing other companies that are focused on recycling. For example, there's one in India called Attero. Are you familiar with them? Attero, what they do is they actually take the used assets and they actually do the physical processing to recycle them. And what they've done is they've set up e-commerce sites in India. So you can log on to this website in India and you can actually sell your product to that company. And what they don't have yet is Buckstop, where you can run that Buckstop in the background. And it's like, again, the Kelly Blue Book, you get an estimate of what your value is of what you have, right? So now it's all opaque. It's whatever the buyer offers you. With your product, correct me if I'm wrong here, you could literally run that on a defined set of attributes for an asset and get a much more granular, specific value number that can make that market more efficient. Is that correct? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's also important kind of as we think about where we fit, it's like that's why we're trying to be a tool to help people value it, because there are so many different stages in the life cycle of an asset, and then also in its second, third life through to recycling, where this data becomes important. And we spend a lot of time with recyclers. I was actually out in West Africa earlier this year on the ground there. And these are incredibly resourceful operations where they are taking in a wide range of scrap, in some cases, working devices, and they're making the most of it and creating new markets. And I think as we think about what needs to happen for the circular economy to really evolve and mature, we think this valuation tool is a key part of that. And fortunately, all around the world, there are people who need energy assets, they need technology. And we're seeing that, companies like Apple doing trade-in programs is a great bellwether for the economy. Most companies don't have the resources, the infrastructure to do that, but it's a signal that, from these companies getting multiple use life cycles out of their products is great for the environment. It's great for their revenue. and it ultimately increases their install base. And I think it's creating opportunities for people both, in the US and internationally. And so we hopefully will be part of that in a data layer that can really help all of these companies figure out what's worth keeping and how to recover the most value from it, either through resale or recycling.
That's awesome. So a question I have is, so you help with the evaluation, you kind of put a dollar figure on the asset that they have, which is very helpful. But that next step is, who do they give it to? Who do they try to sell it to? Do you also provide that information in your evaluation?
Oh, so we're looking at directories and trying, again, our goal is to try and identify and unlock feedstock for resale and recycling. So yeah, absolutely kind of letting them know what are the most effective pathways to resell or recycle is key to that. And that can be domestic or internationally. I don't know if you know, and they call the US the Saudi Arabia of scrap. So a lot of people come from all around the world to get material from the US and ship it internationally for processing. So there's a lot of case to be made that these models and the options are global for resale and recycling. And I think, again, that's something we're looking at of how do you kind of bring a standardized way of valuing it, and then also figuring out who are the approved vendors and things to send it to. So we'll play a role in that for sure.
And I had
That's
a question,
fantastic.
Dustin, Alex, it's not that big of a leap to actually emerge as a market for that, because if you're the place to go to get more granular, accurate information on pricing or cost, and you're aggregating all that, I mean, you could that could emerge as a market, I mean, at some point.
It's not on our plan now. It's funny, people do ask a lot, and I think fortunately there are a lot of great success stories in circular marketplaces. You've got Back Market on the consumer electronic side of note, and there are a lot of great kind of material marketplaces on the recycling side. So we want to be a tool to help all of them. It's not on our roadmap right now to become a marketplace. And I think it's also just when you think about the scale of the problem when it comes to electronic waste and all the different segments, I think for us being a specialist in valuing, and then obviously there are elements to that like forecasting value and figuring out when the right times are to sell. Those are super important insights that can really move the needle for all of these folks who own assets, or the people who are trying to get the most value out of them through resale and recycling. And there's plenty of work to be done to get good at that. And I think it's also a great place to be where we can help all these different stakeholders within the industry without kind of getting into competing with them.
And another question quickly, Alex, if we look at, neodymium, NdPr, let's say magnets, and we look at recycled or end-of-life assets, are there sort of heat maps of where you go to get more end-of-life assets that can be used in the stream of recycled rare earth supply chain? Are there geographical components or considerations? We don't know much. I'm just curious. Are there certain you're saying that the United States is like the number one scrap target market? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, there's, there are kind of multiple stages. That's why I think a heat map is a good analogy for some of the things we're doing, where we look at supply forecasts and then kind of back into geography, the types of companies, things like that, to really understand what the volumes are out there. So that's a key part of what we're doing. And again, that has a lot of implications, for the processes. I think it's just, as things stand, the US doesn't have any tier one smelting capabilities. All of this stuff is sort of, if it's collected at all, is aggregated and sent internationally. I think that's going to change. Obviously, there's a big political push to change that. And so we anticipate a lot more of this feedstock supply staying domestically. And then a lot of the investment that's going into downstream shredding facilities through to kind of refining, that's going to be a beneficiary from it. I think the problem still stands of like, how do you actually get people to recover more and stop throwing it in the landfill or hoarding it? And again, that's sort of where we hopefully we can help on both sides.
Fascinating.
That's awesome. That's great. Alex, looking ahead, if we were to meet again in 5 years and I ask you, how's Buckstop doing, what would you hope to tell me?
So I think in the industry today for circularity, the issue at hand is sourcing and aggregation. So for all of these downstream processes, they need more feedstock sources, and they need it to be kind of organized in a way they get it. So I hope that we play a really big role in working with asset owners, and we become the standard, the Kelly Blue Book for electronic assets, and this point of truth for what's my stuff worth and what should I do with it.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Hopefully sooner than 5 years, but 5 years is a good timeline.
I hear you, man. Things got to move quicker than they actually will. Alex, this has been a great conversation. If you were to summarize really quick, put everything into perspective, and for those that are interested in working with you, what do you want to say?
Well, I think for all of the companies out there who are trying to kind of understand where they fit in this critical mineral landscape, it's like, what is the value hiding in your balance sheet? For a lot of these companies, they're sitting on assets that they're stranded, idle, obsolete, and we're providing tools to help you really understand what your stuff's worth and what you can do with it. So yeah, that's really in a nutshell what we're trying to do. And if we're successful, we hope we unlock a lot of feedstock and we move that recovery rate up domestically, maybe internationally, and that's going to be super beneficial for all of the folks listening who are in the processing business. And we are working with processors to try and look at how we can use our models to help them streamline their valuation process. So the applications, what we're doing, are pretty broad.
Yeah,
Dustin,
fantastic.
as we're getting towards closing here, I just want to say, Alex, I think it's a brilliant idea. One of our main goals or missions is to accelerate what we call ex-China rare earth element supply chain, meaning we help facilitate and influence more activity outside of China so we have more balanced markets and more prosperity around the world. I personally think what you and your colleagues are going for is going to help with that process. So I commend you. I think it's very exciting what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it obviously takes a lot across multiple sectors and industries, and I hope we can play a part of that. So yeah, exciting time to be in this space, and I really appreciate your mission because I think it's very important at this time.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. To those who are listening, if you liked this episode, found it helpful, please give us a like. It'll help expose Alex and his mission that much more. If you don't want to miss a future episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to this podcast. Alex, thank you again for being on the show. And we hope to have you again on the show again in the future so you can give us an update on where things are at and how people can get more involved.
Let's do it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.